Today's video is sponsored by Ground News, of whom more in a bit. Today I'm in Westminster. Once again, Britain finds itself facing a momentous decision. An election is forthcoming, and it is up to us, the people, to decide who... No, actually forget about that. Let's talk about the tube station instead. Westminster is a very old underground station indeed. It opened in 1868 under the name of Westminster Bridge. Now it is probably no surprise whatsoever that the early builders of the underground wanted to serve Westminster. I mean, the government are based here. There's also Westminster Abbey, both an important ecclesiastical site and a major tourist attraction. A station here was basically a guaranteed moneymaker, and when the station opened, the railway company really needed one of those. The station was built by the Metropolitan District Railway, which is better known as just the District Railway, or these days, the District Line. In 1863, the Metropolitan Railway, not to be confused with the Metropolitan District Railway, opened from Farringdon to Paddington. It was the first underground railway and was such a success that other groups started putting forward their own proposals. John Fowler, the engineer of the Metropolitan, and therefore the only engineer with experience of underground railways, put forward an idea to extend the Metropolitan Railway at both ends to form what was known as the Inner Circle, a sort of circle line, if you will. This seemed like a jolly good idea, and so to get it built, a new company was formed, the Metropolitan District Railway. The plan was that the Metropolitan District would build a line from South Kensington to Tower Hill, and the Metropolitan Railway would extend to fill in the gaps. Then the two companies would amalgamate. That last part didn't happen, but I'll get to that in a bit. The first section of the district was to go from South Kensington to Westminster Bridge. The reason they didn't plan to go all the way to Tower Hill from the very start was because Fowler's planned route didn't exist yet. At the time, London was undergoing a massive upgrade to its sewer system. Hitherto, the sewers all emptied into the Thames. This culminated in 1858 with an event known as the Great Stink, which was exactly what it sounds like. To combat the problem, a massive intercepting sewer would be built along the Thames riverfront, which would be landscaped to create what we now know as the Thames embankments. And Britain would never again have a problem with sewage getting dumped into its rivers and seas. Now, for me, I find that my news feed can feel as murky as the Thames in 1858. Now, there's a smooth transition for you. I like my news to be a little clearer, shall we say, and that's why I'm glad to be partnered with Ground News. Recently, I've been following this story about England being swamped with record-level sewage spills in rivers and seas. I can quickly catch up on this based on the nearly 40 articles Ground News found reporting on it, and see their visual breakdowns on each news source's political bias, credibility, and even ownership. This context helps me think critically about the articles I read. Simply comparing the coverage, I learn that sewage was spilled into rivers and seas designated as safe, polluted water-related hospital admissions soared, and even marine species are full of cocaine. The situation is so bad that the fish are turning to drugs. That's where we're at. What is wrong with this country? Best of all, I have access to original research and reporting with Ground News, so I can stay fully informed straight from the source. That's why I'm glad to be partnered with them once again. Their app and website cleans my news experience up like it was a fish in drug rehab. With my Vantage subscription, I also get to create my own custom feeds to stay on top of the news most important to me without being weighed down by issues that I'd like a break from. For example, I can add topics like Greater London and public transport, and exclude, say, football or Taylor Swift. Ground News gives me all the tools I need to stay fully informed while still in control of my news experience. If that sounds good to you too, the fine people at Ground News have an exclusive offer for viewers of this channel. Click the link in the description below or scan this QR code to get 40% off the unlimited access Vantage subscription. So that's the metaphorical muck intercepted. How about the real thing? Fowler figured it would be easier and cheaper to route the line through the new under-construction embankment rather than through the streets where they'd have to demolish existing buildings. So what that meant was that the district would stop, hopefully temporarily, at Westminster Bridge while the embankment was completed, then continue on to Tower Hill. Construction was controversial. The line was built using the cut-and-cover method, which caused a huge amount of disruption. As it passed close to both Parliament and Westminster Abbey, the people making the complaints were rather powerful and influential. There were ancient buildings here that risked being undermined by the underground, not least Westminster Abbey itself. But this section of line was the district's priority. The thinking was that by getting trains running between Westminster and South Kensington, they could pick up some lucrative commuter traffic. After the initial excitement, funding for the new line had slowed down. Eventually, the station was opened on the 24th of December 1868, just in time for those last-minute Christmas shoppers. It was opened with a temporary building and an open roof at platform level. The reason for this was that at the time the line was run using steam locomotives, which needed a lot of ventilation. The station was a terminus at this time, ending in a concrete wall. In 1870 the line through the embankment was completed, and Westminster Bridge became a through station. It was also in 1870 that the station gained one of its most famous features, a pedestrian subway connecting it directly to the Houses of Parliament. In 1884, the inner circle was completed, putting Westminster on the Circle Line. It wouldn't be called the Circle Line until 1949, but you know what I mean. In 1898, the station was the terminus for the only funeral train ever to run over the Underground, that of former Prime Minister William Gladstone. The subway into Parliament was rather useful for avoiding the crowds. In 1901, the District Railway was bought out by Underground Electric Railways of London Limited, a syndicate led by the Chicago businessman and shady character Charles Tyson Yerkes. This buyout was intended to enable the line to be electrified, which it was in 1905. In 1907, the name Westminster Bridge was shortened to Westminster, as it is to this day. In the early 60s, the platforms were lengthened to take longer trains. The most radical change would come in the 1990s. In 1979, London had gained a new tube line, the Jubilee Line. In its original form, it zipped straight past Westminster to Charing Cross, where it terminated. The plan had always been to extend it further, through the city and out to the Docklands, but money had never been available. With the construction of the Canary Wharf development in the 1980s, there was once again demand for a tube line into the Docklands. Or, at least, Olympia and York, the developers, thought so. They wanted a line to Canary Wharf, and what was more, they wanted it to go to Waterloo as well. So London Transport dusted off their ideas to extend the Jubilee Line and told Olympia and York that if they wanted to help pay for it, they could have such a line. But to serve Waterloo, the eastern end of the Jubilee Line would have to be rerouted. Charing Cross Jubilee Line platforms would be abandoned, and they now serve as a testing ground for London Underground, as well as a popular filming location. But that meant that Westminster could get in on that sweet Jubilee Line action, so it was added to the planned extension. Now, if building an underground line here was hard in the 1860s, that's nothing compared to how it was in the 1990s. There were listed buildings in the way, and more underground hazards to be avoided, not least the underground lines that were already there. The solution that the architects Michael Hopkins and partners came up with was to put the station in a concrete box sunk far below street level. The parliamentary bill authorising the extension gave them a bit of leeway in bypassing planning regulations, but still they weren't allowed to go nuts. The actual tracks of the Jubilee Line run just outside the box, one above the other. The architects weren't just building the Jubilee station, but what sat on top of it all: Portcullis House, an office block for the Houses of Parliament. This meant that they could coordinate everything in the design. Rather than dig around the foundations could be incorporated into the design from the start. One complicating factor was the new ticket hall. This had to fit between the District Line and the ground floor of Portcullis House, but that didn't leave enough headroom. Therefore, the actual District Line platforms were lowered by a foot, or approximately a third of a metre in new money. Rather than close the station and do it all in one go, the engineers instead lowered it by a few millimetres a day, during the wee hours when trains weren't running. Despite the ingenuity of all this, the station nearly caused the government a few red faces. One of the other stations on the Jubilee extension was North Greenwich, where the Millennium Dome, as it was called then, was located. This was something the government was very proud of. It was to be a showcase of the very best of Britain. But as the millennium drew near, it was looking like Westminster Station would not be complete. The government could potentially have faced the humiliating possibility of not being able to get to their spiffy new exhibition on their spiffy new tube line. With a Herculean effort, the station was just finished in time, on the 22nd of December 1999, 2 days short of Westminster Station's 131st birthday. I have heard it said that the Jubilee Line platforms are the deepest platforms below sea level on the entire Underground, but that's not quite true. Waterloo's Jubilee Line platforms pip them to the post by approximately 2 feet, or 2/3 of a metre if you prefer. Still, it does have plenty to celebrate. In 2000 and 2002 it was given Civic Trust Awards for its design. In 2000 it won Millennium Building of the Year from the Royal Fine Art Commission. In 2001 it was awarded the Royal Institute of British Architects Award for Architecture. And in 2015 it was voted in at number 10 in a public poll to determine the greatest transport design icons in London. Westminster continues to change. In 2003 it received a plaque commemorating HMS Westminster. And in 2022 Larry Achampong's Pan-African tube roundel was unveiled above the entrance. I doubt those early engineers would even recognise the station today. There's very little of the original station there. The current station is a vast, brutalist structure that looks like something out of a science fiction film. Still, it goes to show that the planners and builders of the 1860s were right to prioritise it. To this day, it's a vital connection to the corridors of power. Well, I do hope you enjoyed this apolitical tale from the tube. If so, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. I would like as ever to thank my donors on Ko-fi, on Patreon and here on YouTube for your generous support. You are the underpinning to my office block. I'd also like to thank Ground News for sponsoring today's video. Check out the link in the description below, or follow the QR code to take advantage of their generous offer. And I will see you all again very soon. Cheerio.